Hey guys, Scott here, and today I want to talk about how I think Killer is harder than Survivor, and that's something I feel like a lot of people agree on, and that's not really much of a video. I wanted to go over why I think that's actually okay. And the main reason I'm making this video is a lot of people always make the argument in a lot of comments where they say, why do you think it's fair that whenever the killer makes a mistake, they're massively punished for it, and whenever survivors make a mistake, it's not that big of a deal? I wanted to go over that portion of it. But first, let's go over the fact that Killer is harder than Survivor. There are some people that disagree. And yeah, I understand if you're playing Survivor and you're going against like a Freddy with swing chains and Ebony Mori. Yeah, it doesn't take that much effort to win. That okay. There are definitely exceptions. There are some bullshit things killers can do. But overall, you have to admit, if you're not on this page, that there is more to learn about Killer. Survivors are just Survivor. There's just, you play one Survivor, you've learned how to play every Survivor. There are a bunch of killers in the game. They all have different powers, so you gotta learn how to play with their powers. You have to learn how to use different perks that accentuate their powers. You got to learn how to micromanage things while you're chasing people. You got to know who is where. You got to know where people spawn. You got to know when to slug. You got to know when to patrol. You got to know. There are like way more things you have to learn about Killer than you have to learn about Survivor. That being said, I don't think Survivor is. I don't think Survivor is just brainless or anything like that. In fact, this is probably a bit of a controversial opinion. I would say that Survivor is actually, it has the same skill cap as Killer, other than maybe like Huntress and like Nurse or something like that. But I think the difference between a master survivor and just a very good survivor is very, very obvious. And I think it's kind of disingenuous to say that it's just very simple to get to that level, because I can very clearly tell the difference between a very, very good survivor and just a, an average decent survivor. The problem why this is so widespread of an opinion, I think, is because it's a lot easier to get to a decent level of Survivor compared to getting to a decent level of Killer, in my opinion. Yes, you can use add-ons and stuff like that to make up for the fact that, you're not super good yet, but on average, it's easier to just be decent at Survivor compared to being decent at Killer. So I think we should all at least be on the same page with that. There is simply more to learn with Killer, and nothing can change that. But let's go over the other aspect, that Killer's mistakes are too heavily punished. And I want to go over how I don't really think that's an issue of balance at all, actually. Because you have to think about the nature of the game. Think about how the game is structured. It's a 1v4 game. When you make a mistake as a killer, you are basically making 100% of your team's mistakes. When you make a mistake as a survivor, you are making 25% of your team's mistakes. Naturally, one is going to be way more impactful than the other. And that has nothing to do with balance. That's just because there are more people to make mistakes on one team, so it lessens the impact of each mistake. When you're playing Killer, you accept the fact that you are your entire team. So any mistake you make is going to be very heavily, reflected upon. The thing is, though, I was thinking about this for recording this video, and I realized it's kind of contradicting what I've said before, and I wanted to go into why that's a thing, because it's interesting. Because maybe it's not just 25%, maybe it's more. Because I brought up the example in my last video. Basically, I gave the example like at an LOLT wall. If the killer makes a mistake, survivor gets away, that's probably an additional 20 seconds of chase at least, where everybody else is doing 20 seconds of gens. Things get out of hand really fast when you're not pressuring the map like that. Really bad for killer. However, if the survivor makes a mistake and the survivor goes down, it's not just that survivor that's affected. It's not just 25% of the team that's affected. Because when you hook that survivor, it affects everybody in the match. Because now someone's got to go save that guy or he dies. And if you're down a player, you basically lose if there's enough gens left. So there's pressure to save that person. If you find the guy that's going to save him, now you're pressuring another person, which means a third person has to come off a gen and go save the guy on the hook. And just like that, by hooking one guy, you've affected 3 people at the minimum. So maybe it's not that simple. I think survivor mistakes are actually more impactful than people claim. It's just, it's not as visceral of a response. Like, you can't see it as much because of like the subtle rippling effects it has throughout the match. When a killer makes a mistake, it's super obvious. The survivor gets away, you watch him go away, and it sucks. When a survivor makes a mistake, the killer doesn't necessarily understand how much pressure that's generating. Because when he hooks the person, it's not like he sees everybody on the map going, oh shit, I gotta go save this guy now. You don't necessarily see what's happening on that side, so it's not, like I said, it's not as visceral, and you don't fully understand that you're still impacting a lot of things too. So that's one interesting kind of point to look at. Another thing I want to go over is the whole mistakes thing. This is, like, I don't understand, like, why killers say this a lot. Killers will say this thing where Basically, killer skill is, it's just, all you can do is wait for survivors to make mistakes. That's all you can do as a killer. And there's some truth to that. Definitely there is some skill in killer to learning how to capitalize on mistakes, because, survivors will make mistakes every single match. When people knock that as not a skill, I don't understand that. It's absolutely a skill, learning how to capitalize on mistakes, and it's ridiculous if you claim otherwise. The thing is, it's an inevitability. Survivors will make mistakes every single game, no matter what. So learning how to capitalize on those mistakes is not something where you're just leaning on the survivors to do something. It's a guarantee. It's going to happen every single match. So it is a skill. And the better you are at capitalizing on those mistakes, the more impact you'll get from the times that they do. But still, I want to go over that whole, that's all the killer can do. They can only capitalize on mistakes thing. Because I think that's fundamentally not true. And I think that's disingenuous, and it's killers that are saying this. Killers that are putting up that excuse that there's nothing they can do. Sometimes it's the case, but it's due to the map, not necessarily the skill of the survivors and the mistakes they make. It's sometimes you just get unbelievably bad map RNG and you're just fucked. That's the game. That's not the survivors themselves. So I wanted to go over that point and show you how there are a ton of examples of both the survivor and the killer playing perfectly, and yet the killer comes out on top. So it's not just about the mistakes the survivors make. For example, let's look at, like how Suffocation Pit, there's like those cubbies on the edge of the map, and there's like a jungle gym there with like the tower, and then another jungle gym. So sometimes you pressure a survivor into that area, and say there's like a jungle gym in that corner of the map. Now, say the survivor's perfect. He just perfectly gauges the distance between you and him, and he drops the pallet just at the perfect time, even gets a stun on you. So the survivor plays perfectly. The killer is looped for, 10, 15 seconds twice around the jungle gym then. So the killer is not helpless then. He can actually, instead of kicking the pallet, rotate around, which forces the survivor to run towards the corner of the map where he can't gain any distance anymore, and kick the pallet on that side. Now the survivor has to run back into the killer and get hit or be downed. And that's an example how the survivor played perfectly. He did nothing wrong. The killer played perfectly. He did nothing wrong. And the killer wins because the survivor goes down, after the 20 seconds of looping. And nobody did anything wrong there. And there were no mistakes. Mistakes had nothing to do with that situation. That was the killer knowledge to know where the survivor was, where to kick the pallet, and how to run it efficiently to get it to that point. And that's just one example. There are so many things that killers have to learn that have nothing to do with mistakes. And that's why I don't understand why killers say that. I don't know why they disservice themselves by saying all it is just waiting for survivors to make sense or make mistakes. Because you're insulting yourself. You're basically saying you don't know how to run tiles properly, you don't know how to push people into bad areas, you don't know how to create dead zones, you don't know how to slug, you don't know when to patrol, you're saying you don't know how to do all these things that require knowledge and mastery of the game. And there are just a bunch of examples of that. Knowing when to slug is a perfect example. That is a knowledge. That's not really relying on a mistake sometimes, because you can push people into a scenario where slugging becomes a good idea. Generally, if you just down somebody and slug them, it doesn't do anything. In fact, it's worse than not hooking them. But if you pressure people into a situation where slugging becomes a very good thing, then it's incredibly strong. And knowing how to do that is another thing that separates, good killers from great killers. And again, it wouldn't have to do with mistakes, because you can have a survivor on a hook, and then if you find that, the second survivor coming for the save, then it's not like the survivor going for the save is making a mistake. A lot of the times he just has to take a hit in order to save this person, and there's nothing he can really do about it. There's other options, let the killer or kill the person on the hook. So the survivor is in an area where he has to get hit, and then when he goes down, it's a perfect time to slug, because now you've got two people in the exact same area. That's generally when you slug, when you have multiple people in the same area. And it's easy to say just spread out, but eventually you will have to push people into a certain area, whether it's because there are generators there, or whether it's because there's a hook there. You can control when people have to go to a certain area, and then you can do things based on that. So that's another thing that you actually do have a lot of control over. It's not just based on the mistakes that the survivors are making. And then there are just other things too, like knowing when to not chase people, knowing when to abandon a chase because you've made a dead zone. And when you create dead zones, it's another situation where mistakes don't matter anymore. Because even if you're chasing someone for 30 seconds, you break 2 pallets, but you don't even hit the guy. That's not a loss. That's not a bad situation. because now there are probably gens in that area, or you can hook somebody in that area. There are many ways to put people in areas that you want them to go. And when you do, now they're in a dead zone, at which point mistakes are irrelevant because they have nothing to do in that area. It's just there's just nothing there anymore. So it's not like mistakes are important anymore because they have no options to even have mistakes to be possible to begin with, because you've controlled the match in such a way that you have made it so mistakes are not part of the equation anymore. It's just a guarantee that you're going to get a free hit. And that's just the kind of stuff I'm talking about. The game is not that simple. It's not just you have to wait for survivors to make mistakes. Again, don't get me wrong. A lot of it is that. A lot of it is knowing that the survivor is too close and you should swing at that pallet because they misjudge the distance and you can probably get a hit here. There's knowledge there. There's definitely a skill to knowing how to capitalize on mistakes, but that's not all the game is. And to just boil it down to just that, it discredits you as a killer. You're insulting yourself. You should think more highly of yourself. Think that there are more things you can do. Stop just trying to have an excuse that there is nothing you can do. Because a lot of the times, you can control the things. You can control situations to even make it so survivors are in more situations where mistakes are more common. And that's something you still have a bit of control over. Now, I do need to make it clear. There are situations where you actually don't have any options. The other day, I got a red forest with, like, the most disgusting setup. There was, like, the shack, and there were, like, 5 loops within 10 meters of the shack. And the last 2 generators were in that area. And I couldn't really know that because I had no reason to go to that area to scout it to know that area was so awful. And situations like that, yes, there's really not much you can do. But I don't think it's fair to, like, blame the survivors. I don't think it's fair to blame, the mistakes and make it seem like that's the only option. You have to kind of blame the map there. Because I think the only time I ever really feel robbed is when the map is stupid. And that is a huge, huge problem. I think if every map was Coal Tower or Father Campbell's Chapel, no one would have a right to complain about Killer, like, ever again. Because with maps that are that small, you actually can pressure people. You can just say that whole meme of just pressure the gens, forehead. You actually can do that because you can physically get there in 15 seconds. When you're on Red Forest and there's a guy 8 miles away, yeah, there's not much you can do there, and that's shitty. But that's more on the map design itself. It's not necessarily a game balance issue. It's not an issue of mistakes being made. It's just shitty map RNG. And that's a whole separate issue, which I made a bunch of videos on, and that needs to be fixed. I don't know why Red Forest is still that big. It's stupid. Big maps equals less control from the killer. So I just want to make it clear that that's mostly the maps and not, like, the mistakes and the survivors and things like that. So overall, I just want it to be known that, Killer is definitely harder than Survivor. There's a lot more you have to learn. There's a lot more that you can do as Killer that probably people don't give enough effort towards, and they just like taking the easy excuse that it's not up to them, it's up to the survivors. But it is definitely a thing that it is harder to play Killer. And that's okay, because you are 100% of the team. It's expected that you would have more responsibility because you are the entire team. When you're a survivor, you're part of, a team of multiple people. So the mistakes you make are not as impactful. And that's how the game is always going to be. Even if it's perfectly balanced, it'll always be more punishing to make a mistake as a killer than it is to make a mistake as a survivor. That's just never, ever going to change. So I don't think that's a good arguing point. I don't think people should keep repeating that because the game is never not going to punish killers more than to punish survivors. That's just how asymmetrical games are structured, and that's just the reality of the situation. Overall, I think that's about it. I think I said what I wanted to say. Whew, that's a lot of talking. Alrighty, guys. I think that is it for this video. Hope you enjoyed. This is the third take because of this fucking guy and this fucking guy, girl. But that is it, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Appreciate it. And we'll see you in the next one, hopefully.